We're talking today with Mr. Rex Funnell of Whitehall, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. All right, now Mr. Funnell, can you start by giving us a little background on yourself? Where and when were you born, for instance?
I was born in Whitehall, July 10, 1916, and
what did your family do for a living?
my dad was a barber, my mother was a stay-home. Those days, the family was usually the wife staying home taking care of the kids. And I had an older brother who really never lived at home. He was ill when he was born, so my grandparents took him in. They lived about a block away, and so we saw each other every day, and we went to school together. I was 4 and he was 5, but I was understood that later that he did not want to go to school alone, so they sent me with him. And so we went all the way through high school together and graduated in 1933, and I was only 16 years old at the time, so there wasn't much I could do except work in grocery stores and whatever in town.
Right. Now, of course, you get into the early 1930s. We've got the Depression going at that point. Now, was your father able to keep his job through that time?
Well, he had a barber shop, and he owned the barber shop,
Right.
and he and his brother were the only two that worked there, and they opened at 7 in the morning and usually got home 7, 8 o'clock at night. As long as there was a customer coming in, they stayed and worked. And so we, and my granddad, had a meat market right next door to my dad's barber shop. So we, during the Depression, had it pretty good because Grandpa had all the meat and stuff and so forth. So our families didn't realize what the Depression was all about, except in town they put a sewer line in and the various things that they had guys working at.
Okay, so you saw the public works projects going on.
Oh yes, they had
that
a
sort of
sewer
thing.
line. They had a new street put down in the middle of the street, which wasn't paved at that time, so that was done in '33 or sometime in there. So the town itself did real good because they took advantage of some of the things the government was offering for minimum wage for guys, and guys had jobs to do.
Okay, so you were getting roads improved or bridges built or things like that?
Yes, the whole main street was redone, and they put a sewer line in the town, and which was good because before we didn't have any sewer systems. And but after I graduated, I had really my brother went to work at the tannery at that time because during the Depression, the tannery was our main source of factories in the town, and the Depression didn't seem to bother them. In fact, they were hiring some people that were coming home from the cities that had lost their jobs, and they came home and they proceeded to get jobs even working in the tannery during the Depression years.
Well, were they making things that were just sort of basic enough or essential enough so that the market was still there?
They made bag leather, and they made leather for car seats, and they made shoe leather. And primarily the bag leather was the big issue, and then shoe leather was next. And tannery did real good during the Depression for the town.
Okay.
But,
now, so you started there, let's say 1937 then.
Yeah, at the tannery. Yeah, I
And
started
then,
working at the tannery.
and then you got married the same year?
Yes, yeah, and my wife worked at the tannery also. She worked at the tannery, and so we, and my brother worked there. We had, and when we got married, we didn't even have a car, so Raymond picked us up and take us to work and bring us back home. So, and we didn't buy a car until, I don't know what year it was. It had to have been 38, 39 before we bought a car. And first new car I ever bought was a 1941 Chevy when they first came out with a Chevy 5-passenger coupe, and it was, I think, $750.
Right. Now, you mentioned here in your kind of outline that you worked there at the tannery for a while, but then eventually you take over your grandfather's meat market?
Yes, yeah. Granddad Ainger had a severe stroke. He had the meat market next to my dad's barber shop, so my cousin and I, they wanted us to take over the meat market, which we did, and had a lady that her husband had a meat market at one time, and she knew what some of the ins and outs of running a meat market was and cutting meat and everything, because we got a lot of our a lot of our meat came in a side of beef
Right.
or whatever, and then we had to cut it into chops and steaks and things like that.
Right.
So,
That was not the era of the prepackaged meats
No,
cut in
no,
someplace from a factory.
no, and we delivered at that time, and we had a young lad that worked for us and had a little truck, and we delivered all through town. People would call in and want meat, and we did have a few canned vegetables or canned fruits and veggies and stuff. And if they wanted something else, we'd run across the street to the grocery store and get it and deliver it to people
Okay.
in those days.
To what extent did you notice kind of the rationing and stuff that was going on around that time?
We never had any problem of any rationing, not when I was there. Now, later on, the gas rationing and stuff started after the war.
Right.
more or
And
less.
did meat rationing not start until after the war started?
Yes, they didn't have any meat rationing at that
Okay.
time, no. In fact, we were really glad to sell any people that wanted to buy anything in those days. That was still during the Depression days up until.
Okay. Now, pretty quickly, you're kind of in charge of that shop on your own, aren't you? Your cousin got drafted?
Yes,
In 39?
Yeah, he got drafted right away in the first draft. He was single, and he got right in and had to go in the first draft. And in fact, I think he probably enlisted because he wanted to get in the Air Corps.
Mm-hmm.
So he left real early then to go in the service. And I had another lady that helped us.
Right.
She worked in there then, and that's when I decided I was going to get a job other than, because the meat market really wasn't producing like we wanted it to. So
Right.
I got a job at the Continental Motors working midnight shift.
Now, was that down in Muskegon or is
Yes,
that up
in
here?
Muskegon,
Okay.
yeah.
So how would you get down there?
There were 2 or 3 other people, guys that I knew. In fact, I ended up, one guy drove and 3 others rode with him and of course paid him, and we all worked a midnight shift.
Right. Okay. And what kind of work were you doing down there?
Well, running machines, lathes, and drill presses, and various things. And as you got in seniority, then you could move up to various other areas where the work was a little, well, it was a little cleaner because we were in cast iron then.
Right.
And I had a relative of mine who was a boss in one of the departments, and he saw me and asked me if I wanted to work for him. And I said, well, sure did. So that was one of those things that who you know and what you
Right.
know. So I got a real good job running some mills there that we did some called barrels. They had fins on them, barrels they use in the Army tanks. And so I stayed there until I got drafted.
All right. Now, do you remember hearing about Pearl Harbor?
Oh yes, definitely. In fact, I was still in bed on that Sunday morning, and I don't know if it was my dad or somebody came banging on the window to tell us about it, and so that's how I heard about it, was through that, and turned the radio on, and that's how we heard about it.
All right. Now, did you figure at that point that you wouldn't have to go, or that the Army would come after you when they felt like it, or?
I guess I didn't really think much about having to go. We had, well, at that time we didn't. My one son was born in May of '43, and so I didn't really think much about going. I say my cousin had gotten drafted earlier on there, but no, I didn't think much about going. We had our notices that we had to go down for physicals and stuff, but anyhow, I didn't think much about going in until we did have to go down for our physicals and stuff. And at that time, we had a choice of going in the Navy, and at that time, you went directly from Detroit to Great Lakes.
Yes.
And if you took the Army, then you had 10 days at home before you back to Fort Custer. So I decided I wanted 10 days at home instead of going in the Navy.
All right. So then when did you have to report then for training?
In July, it was sometime in July 16th, somewhere along in there.
Yeah. Well, you got heading off to Fort Custer on July 16th, 43.
Yeah, to Fort Custer.
All right. And then did they give you testing there, or just
No,
figure out where to send
we were
you?
in. That's where we were in the service. That's when they swore us into the service down there, Fort Custer. We were drafted there and stayed there until various people that we went in with even from Muskegon County would be, you'd fall out in the morning and they would call your name off, and then they got shipped someplace.
Right.
And finally, after a couple of days down there, a cousin of mine, and another Everett Funnell, he was there too, and we both got called off at the same time. That's when we went to Fort Bragg.
All right. So you're off to Fort Bragg. It's in North Carolina. What did you do when you got there?
Well, we just took the regular basic trainings that they put you through, like like crawling. You've seen the pictures of people crawling under the fences with machine gun fire over the top of you, and all the running and everything you had to do to get in shape to be in the service.
How did the drill sergeants treat you?
Ours, from what I can remember, were always good. It's never like I've seen the Marines where it seemed like they were always harassing the guys. But no, the ones we had were all real good, and tried to really be helpful. They didn't try to harass you in any way.
Okay, now at the time you're there, you're kind of in your mid-late 20s at that point. Were you one of the older guys there?
Oh yes, definitely. Okay. Yeah, I was about 27, 28, somewhere along in there when I went in.
Were you older than the men who were training you, or were some of them older?
Probably older than some of them, yes. I guess I never really looked my age. I know some of the guys later on that I was with, and they were all in their around 20 years old, most of the guys, and they couldn't believe. I don't know how it came about. One day we were talking age and stuff, and I told them what I was.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't believe me. Yeah, you're not that old. Well, yes, I am. I was born in 1916.
All right.
But so.
Okay, and let's see, did they put much emphasis on Army discipline, following orders and saluting and all that kind of thing?
Well, definitely saluting officers. That was always a big thing. The Second Louis, everybody always called the Second Louis. They like to be saluted as they got higher rank. They like to be saluted too, but not like the. I know. I had a chance to go to officers candidate school when I got to Fort Benning, but after what I'd heard about the second lieutenants and everything being the lowest on the rank of that, I thought, no, I don't care about being an officer.
All right. Now, let's see. You got in your notes here that you were at Fort Bragg for about 6 months.
Yeah, we had a basic training there.
And then, was that all basic training, or did you do more advanced stuff while you were there as well?
Well, as we went on, they gave you more advanced stuff and certain things, and of course, you had everything. They put you through wiring, and they put you through even trying to learn the Morse code, and they had everything like that. And I guess if some of them showed more aptability at some of those things, they would send them to a different school where they could maybe use them in something like that.
Right. Now, at this point, were you assigned to units, or were you still just there training as eventual replacements or whatever?
Well, as far as we knew, we were just there as individuals and didn't know what we were going to do or what they were going to put us in after we finished our basic training.
Okay. Now, once you did finish that training, you probably get to the beginning of 44 by that time.
Yes.
Now, did you get to go home at Christmas, or did you have to stay in camp?
No, I didn't get to go home that year. What was the reason? See, we went down there in where was that at Christmas? I don't see. We after we finished our basic training there, then we were going to. First thing they did was had us all go through a line and measure us and height and everything, and had one group, the ones under 5'7", went one way, and the other guys went another way, and I was just 5'8" is all. But we found out later that the guys that were under that had gone right up to New York and had shipped out. We didn't know that at the time what the deal was, but then we were found out then we were going to Camp Gruber in Oklahoma, and we were going to be in a mule pack outfit.
All right. Now, where was Camp Gruber in Oklahoma? Do you remember?
It was in northern part of Oklahoma. It was in Muskogee or something
Okay.
like that.
There's a Muskogee there.
Yeah.
Was it close to Fort Sill, or
Not too close.
well, how long did you stay at Camp Gruber?
I didn't stay there
Oh.
too long. We got called in, and we were going to be in a mule pack, so
Mhm.
they were having various, and they sent myself and a few of the other guys down to Fort Sill, not knowing what we were going to do till we
Mhm.
got there. And that's where I found out I was going to be shoeing mules.
Okay. Now, what did they need mules for?
Well, they were training for mountain training, and had used mules for the mountain training. And in fact, one unique thing about the mule pack was the mule was more important than you. Going up mountains and stuff, you did not take a hold of the tail of a mule. That was a court martial right there, because they said that he's more important than you.
So you didn't want to pull them off the trail or something
But
like
I got out of a lot of that because we were down at Fort Sill going through schools for various guys, and when the outfit moved to Camp Carson, Colorado, and they trained going up Pike Peak or up the mountains. There is where they trained. So we didn't get in on any of that. The fellows that were down there learning specialties of packing mules and shoeing mules, and when we joined them up in Colorado, they were getting ready to go to California to go on maneuvers with another mule pack outfit. So.
Now, did you actually spend much time actually working with mules and?
Oh yes.
So you learned to shoe a
we had
mule?
to go out and we had to light the forge and take shoe right from scratch and put it on, lift the mule up and put it to his foot to see what you had to do to shape it first, and then you had to cut it and tack them on their foot just as to make sure that the instructor could see what you had done was right for the mule, the shoe. And you had to be very careful when putting a nail in, because you didn't hit the quick part of the mule, because you'd end up the other side of the room.
All right. Now, about how long did you spend at Fort Sill, do you think?
I've forgotten whether it was 6 months or 3 months. I said 6 months once, I think, but I think it was more like 3 months that we spent there.
Okay. Now, at this point, are you assigned to a unit now?
We were, as soon as we got up at Camp Gruber up there, we were assigned to this division, the 71st Division. We found out later that.
All right.
But we were still, and those guys had left there to go to Colorado, and then that's where we left to join them at Colorado.
Okay. And then you're assigned to a particular artillery unit then?
Yeah, we were assigned to I was, of course, when you're in something special like that, you're in headquarters battery. And the other guys, of course, the other batteries are firing batteries, but the wire people were laying wire and telephones and stuff like that, you're in the headquarters battery.
Now, was there an expectation that your unit would fight as a mountain unit and you'd have small howitzers?
That's what we thought. They had to learn to pack the guns on the mules and stuff like that. That's what we thought it was going to be.
Right. Okay. Then, did you have duties that extended beyond shoeing mules then? You're working in the headquarters battery?
Not anything, because then when we went after the school, we joined a unit, then we went to California to go on maneuvers, which they did. But we didn't have to really do anything in headquarters batteries. The other batteries had to go through all the maneuvers, but we just stayed at the base camp. And we had mules there that we didn't do anything with except feed them and take care of them, but we didn't do anything other than that. We stayed at the Camp Hunter Liggett is where we were.
All right. How well did you get along with the mules?
How long or
How well?
Well, as well as they wanted to be. Now you've seen pictures of them being set like this, and they wouldn't move, and that was the truth. There was sometimes, this didn't happen that often, but sometimes they would just, if you're going to take them down for water or something, they just wouldn't move. You get a couple of guys behind them trying to shove them and pull on them, and they just wouldn't move.
All right. Now, after the California maneuvers, where do they send you next?
Well, that's excuse me. That's when they split up and decided they didn't need two mule pack divisions.
Right.
And some of our guys went to the ones that were still going to be in mule pack, and the rest of us then were shipped to Fort Benning.
Okay. So you go to Fort Benning, Georgia. You're still with the headquarters battery of your battalion.
Yeah.
So now that there aren't any mules anymore, what are you going to do?
We start another basic training. Yeah, to be regular 71st Division. And so we didn't know at that time what any of us were going to do. We all went to another basic training of all the stuff that we were in.
And then what kind of training then did you get?
Well, we did still all the training that we got. I say I went to about 3 or 4 basic trainings where you had to crawl under the wire, where you had to do all the running, and you had to do this and do all the thing that they did in basic training.
Okay. Now, were there new recruits coming in who were training with you?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Now, were you part of a cadre that was training the rest of them, or were you just
we
a soldier
were all
going
being
through?
trained by the padre there that they had there at, at Fort Benning.
So, did you wonder how many times you'd have to do that?
Yes, I did at that time. I thought, well, is there any end of this going to a basic training?
Now, did you get a specialized assignment within the headquarters unit? Did you work?
Yeah, I did, and I don't know why. Of course, they all had you going in taking various tests off and on for electrical stuff and this and that, and I don't know why or how that I got into being in that message center. That I never did find out how I got chosen to be in message center, which was, as far as I was concerned, was good.
Well, what were you doing at the message center? What were you doing?
Well, all the information, see, we're in headquarters battery, and all the A, B, and C batteries below us were all part of what we had to take care of as far as, and all the information that came in to me in the message center. And then I had to distribute each one of the units that were there. They had guys there from the batteries with some of this information to take back to their headquarters there for their head officer, their lieutenant, whoever was in charge of that.
Now, were you getting just orders from above, or were you getting coordinates from observers, or what were you handling coming in?
Well, it was mostly just stuff that they were going to do or change. It had nothing to do with really anything of too much importance, except changing some various things that like the government would do. It wasn't, I don't know how to say it. It just wasn't. It was just normal.
It was administrative.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's different from doing fire control or something like that.
Oh,
where
yeah,
you're doing
definitely.
that. Okay. But
Yeah,
this is
fire
just,
control
this is
would
just
be
to run the battalion with. All right. Now, you leave Fort Benning, and then from there you'll get shipped overseas. Now, did you get to go home at some point before you went overseas?
No.
Okay. So you just
No, we
stayed
didn't
with your
at that time. We didn't. All of a sudden, we were being shipped out. We ended up in New York. Can't even think. Kilmer, what town, what camp we were, but when we shipped right out of there, we didn't.
Yeah. Well, Camp Kilmer, New Jersey was a big outlet
that's
point.
That's Kilmer. I think that's where we went out of.
Okay. I guess your outline notes that you left Fort Benning in Georgia of December of '44, and maybe in part because that's when the Battle of the Bulge starts, and they decide maybe they need soldiers faster than they thought they would.
Yeah.
All right. So you ship out of there, you go up to New York. What kind of boat did you sail in?
We were on what we found out later was a, what do I want to say, a cruise type.
It's like a
ship.
passenger ship, a liner.
It was smaller than it was used to go from around the New York area down to some of the islands as a
cruise ship.
Yeah. And that's what we got on. Smaller. It wasn't as big as a lot of the other ones, of course, that we're on. But we were in big convoys, so.
About how many men do you think were on your ship with you?
I don't know. There probably could have been 300 or 400. I really don't know.
Was it basically just your battalion's personnel who were there?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay.
In our area, in the bunk area we were in, were all guys that I had known.
Right. Now, what was the weather like on the crossing?
rough. It was in November. It was really rough.
Mm-hmm.
And about it seemed like every half hour they would call a submarine alert, and everybody had to go up on deck. And that's when you realize how the waves were up there and you're down here. You know how that goes. And guys had their heads in the barrel half the time when they got up on deck, more so than when you're down below. And we had one fellow with us. He never did get out of the bunk. We brought him food, but he didn't want to eat. He couldn't eat. He was sicker than a dog. Bad.
Okay. Did you get seasick yourself?
No, I didn't. I didn't call it seasick because it was 3 or 4 days out later, and everybody was up on deck, and I was standing right next to by one of the barrels, and with all those heads in that barrel, kind of made me a little nauseated. So I did join them for just a little, but I really didn't feel seasick.
Right.
No.
Now, as far as you can tell, did the convoy actually get attacked by anybody, or they just had alerts?
Not that we knew of.
All right.
We were called up enough, but never did we hear any firing going on because we were surrounded with I don't know much about shipping, but a cruise of Army or Navy.
Yeah, you had probably destroyer escorts, corvettes, things like
and
that.
stuff around us going over.
Right. Okay. Do you have a sense of how long it took you to get across the ocean?
I think it was around 14 days.
Yeah, that's pretty likely. And then where did you land?
Well, we went into, we didn't land there though. We went into Southampton, New England, but then right away they shifted us back over to Le Havre, and we actually landed in Le Havre.
All right. And then from there, what did you do?
Well, that's when everybody got their clothes and some winter clothes, because it was getting that time of the year. So.
Right.
And we stayed in camp called Old Goal for, I don't know how long it was. It could have been a month or whatever we stayed there. I don't recall exactly.
Now, were you sleeping in tents there? Or?
Oh yeah, just little pup tents, 2 guys to a pup tent, and we had more clothes under, more things under us than we did over us. Raincoats and our big old heavy Army coats we put underneath us. And
yeah, France is kind of cold and wet and muddy that time of year. So now, was that experience sort of physically, was that worse than what you'd had in training camp in different places?
Yeah. Because we were down south most of the time for training camps, and nothing was, that it was getting cold then in November and December I guess it was then. And
how did your unit's morale hold up during that?
Well, I guess we just took it for granted. This is it, what we got to do, you got to do. So.
And did you have much of a sense of what was actually going on up at the front, or were you just sitting around?
No, we didn't at that time. No, we had no information of much going on at all. No.
All right. Now, when the order finally does come to move, how do you move? Do you walk or take a truck or a train? Or?
We were in headquarters battery, so we had trucks to load in, and we rode. And of course, the Army, the guys walking, I think 90%. I don't know if they all loaded them in trucks or not. I would assume they did at first, because we went, through by Paris and quite a few miles to get where we were going, and I would assume that the infantry were loaded into trucks also.
Most likely at that point. All right. Then where do they send you?
Well, we went up to a town called Bitch, France. That's where we went to first, right there.
And was that just a staging area or a camp?
No, that's where we started. We heard the shells going over. In fact, I didn't at the time. We had camp stopped back further, and one of the lieutenants wanted to go up to the further up. So he got me with a Jeep, and I drove him up to around Bitch. Then we weren't quite there yet. And he went in an office, and all of a sudden I heard this, and I said, well, our guns were behind, shooting over our heads, and I didn't realize what it was at first. Then I found out it was our artillery firing over where the office, where he wanted to go.
Okay, so at this point, sort of in the northeast corner of France, pretty much near the German border. That point. Now this is probably March
Yeah.
or maybe late February or March, depending on how long you actually stayed at Le Havre. So at this point, you've got the counterattack after the Battle of the Bulge has been going on, and now all the American forces are starting to push forward and move toward Germany.
Yeah. Well, we thought we were moving up north at that time too, because we were told that, about the Battle of the Bulge and so forth, and we thought that's where everybody was headed. And then I guess the word came that they had stopped them and were going the other way. So then we went across from where we were, which I don't remember now, that we finally crossed into Germany.
Right. Now, between your starting point around Beach and then the Rhine River, did your unit actually get into much combat?
Our infantry did, which we didn't really, being in headquarters battery and not even in a gun battery, that we didn't really know too much about what was going on, except we had guys come back that were forward observers and lieutenants with them, and they would come back every once in a while and report to us sometimes what was going on up there, that these guys were going ahead, the forward observers telling sending information back, the coordinates of where to shoot the 105s and so forth. So that's where we got most of our information, what was going on a mile or two ahead of us.
And were you doing a lot of communicating with higher level headquarters from there? You'd report to the regiment or the division?
We didn't know, but I'm sure that our officers did know. We did have some information coming back from them to me, but I never knew really what it was. I just gave it to whoever it was addressed to, what officers, the captain or whoever, or some of the other batteries. But
now, are these telephone communications, or are they telegraph Morse code kind of things?
At that time, no. They just every one of the batteries had a guy with a jeep at our quarters, and if anything went on that they had to know, they would get it and go back to their batteries with it.
So they were using couriers.
Because didn't stay long enough to even hook up too many telephone lines or anything. The only ones that hooked up lines were the firing batteries and stuff. But,
all right. Now, what kind of quarters did you have when you were in this phase of the campaign? You kind of move around and...
Well, we had what we could find primarily as we were going around. We just slept in our jeeps or on the ground or whatever. And sometimes if we were near a town, we would take over some house or something and get inside out of the weather. But it was just wherever you were that night or whatever, what you took over.
Now, were you doing that still in France, or were you in Germany at the point where you were taking over houses?
Most of the time it was after we got into Germany.
And when you would go into a house or something like that, would the people who lived there still be there, and you just
sometimes if they were there, they went out in a barn or something if they had or whatever. And but a lot of them, after we got in Germany, there wasn't very few of them that had anybody, and in fact the towns had been evacuated and taken over.
Okay. Now, as you're moving forward in Germany, are most of the towns still physically in pretty good shape so far, or?
Most of the towns were. The cities like Munich and Nuremberg and places like that were pretty well, because you hear the planes going over all day at that time, and we knew what was going on because you could hear the bombs and so forth, that figuring that there was going to be much left.
And did you ever see or hear anything of German aircraft or buzz bombs or things like that?
We never seen anything. We saw German aircrafts or German aeroplanes because of the insignias and stuff, and we did see some of the fighting up, in the air with the planes, but we never were attacked it ourselves by a plane.
Right.
No.
You might not have been a very obvious target much of the time. Okay. Did you ever see any of the German jet aircraft that you can recall?
No. I don't recall seeing much.
Just regular propeller aircraft as usual. Okay. Now, do you remember crossing the Rhine River?
Well, we were crossed on bridges made by our Corps of Engineers. They were, you could tell all the bridges most of the bridges they had blown up as they took off. They would blow up most of the bridges. So our Corps of Engineers had to construct bridges for the trucks and stuff to go across on, which we were in, and they were quite, weren't too stable, but they were good enough to go across on.
Right. Now, once you got across the Rhine, you kind of keep pressing on into the middle of Germany at this point. Now, did the fighting get any more or less intense as you move forward?
It kept getting less because, from what we understood then, more of the soldiers were either old or young, and some that would send them back. Prisoners would come back through, and they'd send them back to the rear unit someplace, and there'd be some of them, that we would see them going by, and it got to be that, like you say, most of them were either young kids or older people. Although SS guys, and most of those guys had already been done away with or captured and whatever.
All right. And your unit wound up capturing quite a few prisoners, didn't they?
Yes, they did. In fact, I know one time, I don't know how it happened, we had a half a dozen prisoners riding on the fenders of some of the Jeeps that we had. I don't know why we had them, why they just didn't. I guess we didn't have anybody to send them back any further with, so we just took them with us. And they were riding on the fenders of the Jeeps, and of course, one of the guys riding in the Jeeps had the carbine pointed right at them all the time, so and I don't think they wanted to escape it anyhow.
In general, do they seem maybe a little bit relieved that they were captured?
I think so, yes. Yeah. It seemed that way. A lot of them were, like I said, at that time it got to be more people that were in the service that they didn't want to be, but they had to be. And I think they were just as happy to be alive and be taken prisoner.
Now, you mentioned that some of the cities seemed to be pretty badly damaged. Which ones do you remember actually going through?
Nuremberg and Munich, Augsburg. Those were all pretty well blown up.
Now, when you went there, would you actually go through the middle of the city, or did you?
Yeah, it seemed like some of them. Now, not all of them, but it seemed like we were pretty much in the city itself.
But somebody had cleared the rubble out of the streets so you could get through.
Yeah. Evidently, the Corps of Engineers were ever ahead of us. Of course, we would be some of the last ones through, being in the artillery.
Right.
We'd be some of the last ones through, and they always had a good road area.
Okay. Now, as you get farther into Germany, you're also getting into the areas where they had both prison camps and concentration camps. And did you see any of those as you went through?
Well, we saw two. We liberated two of them, but one of them was in Austria, and I forget where the other one was at this time. But we liberated two of the prison camp, where Jewish people and so forth were in. And in fact, at one time we had of course the infantry is the ones that liberated them ahead of us.
Right.
But as we were going down the road, they were lined up coming this way, like we all said. How do they know even where they're going? Because everything back where we came from was blown up, and they probably were from, I don't know where, if there were Jews where they had been from. Some of them right from Germany, but others from where else the camp came to from.
And were they still in their camp uniforms?
Oh yeah, they used to have their striped uniforms and stuff on, and every one of them were wanting food or something, and whatever we had in any of our vehicles, of candy bars or what we had from our sea rations, we were throwing them out to them. Anything we had, even our cigarettes and stuff like that.
Were you warned to be careful about what you fed them? Because in some cases, some of these people were such bad physical condition that Richards would hurt them.
Didn't even think of that.
But it may be that if they were strong enough physically to walk and move, then they might have been a little better.
These people, I think, were better than some that they would see in the camps going into them, that they weren't able to get out. And but most of them that we saw were thin, but they were able to walk, and they just looked pretty haggard. But
Right. Did you know much at this time about what the Germans had been doing, about extermination of Jews and things like that?
Well, we heard it later on from it would drift back to us from the infantry. It would drift back to us, and then as we got to some of these camps, we were told they had guards around the camps at that time, and they didn't allow people, anybody else in, but we were informed by them of what to expect in there if you got in there, the burning places, and all the bad things that what was going on.
All right.
We never got into one of them ourselves.
All right. Now, how far did you wind up getting by the end of the war, at least in Europe?
We were in Austria at the end of the war.
Okay.
So
And
we were in our area. Unit was in a town called Wells, W-E-L-L, Wells, Austria, and they were they were in various towns, and that's where we met the Russians.
did you actually see some Russian soldiers yourself?
Oh yes, yeah.
And did you have any contact with them, or did they just stand over there and you stood over here?
Oh no, we had a little vodka with them.
What impression did you have of them when you saw them?
They were real happy to see us, as we were to see them, and it was just kind of a friendly greeting, is all that I can remember.
Now, in your area, were there refugees trying to come from farther east into the American-occupied area, or did you not see that there?
I did not see anything like that, no.
Because there were some places where you'd have a lot of civilians trying to get away from the Russians before they got there.
Yeah.
Probably not as much down there in Austria
No.
as up toward Berlin and places like that.
Yeah, that way probably.
Okay.
No.
Now, once the Germans surrendered then in May of '45, how long did you stay in Austria before you shipped out?
We had to have been there for a month or so. I just trying to think of what went on that we did there, because it didn't seem like we were there very long, and we shipped back into the States, and we were in a little town called Unterbar, trying to think what it was, below Munich. Augsburg, I think, was the closest big area there was to where we were. And our outfit took over a castle there. Yeah, it was a big. I couldn't find some pictures. I was looking for pictures of the castle that we headquarters battery took over and set up in that castle.
So you're in that sort of southern Germany there for a while after you come out of Austria. And then when do they ship you back over to the States?
Well, I got shipped back on emergency leave because Marcia was in the hospital in Grand Rapids at that time, very seriously ill, and so all of a sudden I got notice that I was being shipped home on emergency, and I went up to 69th Division, which I guess they had
Been in
various
longer,
people doing the same thing, and so we got on a plane there and flew into Paris, and then took a train down to Le Havre, where we shipped out of Le Havre to go back. So I left the division earlier than I probably would have. My point system would have been pretty good. That's people were going home on points at that time.
Yeah, because you were married and
I was
had
married and had
children, or
2 kids, 2 children, and my age-wise, I was much 5, 6, 7 years older than most of the guys in the outfit. So I'd have gotten out of there sooner than a lot of them did, but at that time it was an emergency, so I went up to the 69th and stayed there. You wouldn't know it was an emergency. You thought, what's going on here, Finally we got on a plane from there and went to Paris, and then took a plane, and they put us on a victory ship or something they called them, and they were one of the bigger, what the heck was the name of that, bigger ships there.
Well, they were bigger than the Liberty ships.
Oh, yes.
And maybe a little faster.
Yeah, much faster, because we left Le Havre then on that, and as we got out, I don't know how far, but all of a sudden this big ship went buzzing by us, and they took probably 7, 8 days against our about 12 or 14 days to cross. I thought, now, why anybody knew what they were doing, they'd put us guys on a ship like that instead of putting us on that victory ship, and we were sleeping down just in the hole of the darn thing. Every time I go out of water, that rudder would go like this, and the whole floor would shake.
All right. Now, when did you get back to the States then?
Oh, we landed in Boston, and like I say, you try to tell them you're on emergency leave, and some of the other guys were too, but they didn't seem to process us any faster than anybody else.
Now, were they processing you for discharge at this point, or just for?
That's what it seemed like. Because then we went to Camp Atterbury from there.
Right.
And it took, I don't know, a couple of weeks for me to get out of Atterbury to go home.
Mm-hmm.
And they found out, well, in fact, one reason was they found out I had a hernia.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't going to be able to be discharged anyhow. I was going to have to stay in and have the hernia taken care of down at Camp Atterbury. So that's when I finally got home was, I don't know. And by the time I got really out of the service was about May. And I'd gotten,
In like May of '46.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
and it took me, I bet you I was at Camp Atterbury 3 months.
And what were you doing while you were in Cat Atterbury?
Nothing.
Just.
Well, after I had surgery, that was another strange thing. They were doing a, what should I say, an experimental deal with surgery on hernias.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them stayed in bed 5 days, some of them stayed in bed 7 days, and so forth. Lucky me, I got the last one of the guys staying in bed for 12 weeks.
Hmm.
And it was,
By the time they let you out and you got to go home, was there any emergency still at home? Or?
no, there wasn't. The time we got there, no, Marcia was home and well, and no, there was no need. I found that out as soon as I got to Boston. I found out that there wasn't any need to be hurrying home then.
Right.
But, so.
Okay,
But,
and then once you did get home, what did you do after that? What kind of work did you go into?
well, I went back to Continental for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I went back to Continental until decided I was gonna. My dad had the barber shop, and decided I'd go to barber school and be a barber. So, but I worked about a year at the Continental, waiting to get into barber school in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
So from then on, it was. I say I worked at Continental and then went to barber school. I think it was 6 months. 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a year or more they have to go to barber school
Right.
now. But it was a 6 months deal that we had on Michigan Avenue, Skid Row area.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, it was kind of comical. They went to Greens Barber College on Michigan Avenue, and they had the basement floor was where they had all the Skid Row, the guys who had been drinking, and they didn't know. So some of them were so bad that when they'd come in there, their breath you couldn't. But we would lather them all up, and put a hot towel and stuff on them, and lather them up and wipe the lather off and out the door. They didn't know if they had a shave or whether they didn't have it. They had a clean face. Some of you didn't want to shave them. They were smelled so bad, and you didn't think they could hold still long enough without cutting their throats anyhow. And we were all just training then.
Right.
So we got kind of give them a good face wash, and they felt a heck of a lot better. And out the door they went. But that was not an everyday occurrence. You had to shave them once in a while. You needed the experience.
Right.
But some of those guys you just couldn't.
All right. Now, did you in fact become a barber and then
Oh, yeah.
make a career out of that?
Yep. Yeah, I worked in the barber shop 32 years, and my dad worked there until, well, he was still working part-time when he had a heart attack and passed away. He was still working, he'd worked on a Saturday, because we had a six-chair barber, five-chair, we had a six-chair, but we had 5 barbers in there in the summertime, and 3 and 4 most of the year round. And Dad would come in. I had one odd chair there, and if we were busy or something, he'd come in on a Saturday and work and so forth. But then he had a heart attack on a Sunday, and he passed away on a Wednesday, and he was 79 when he died.
All right. Well, to look back on the whole thing now, how do you think your time in the service wound up affecting you?
Well, it was a good experience. It's something I'm glad I did. At the time, you didn't really want to be there, of course, but it was something that now that it's all over with, I think it was a good experience for me, really. It was, you knew what life was all about, and it wasn't just a bed of roses all the time. And what we went through and did was good, yeah, a good experience.
All right. Are there individual experiences or people or things that kind of come back into your mind fairly regularly out of that time that you haven't mentioned here in the story?
Well, some of the guys, there's a few of them that, well, Lyle Story is one of them that I've been in contact with, and he's way out in California. And Bob Sorter lives out. Most of those guys that I knew, nobody was from Muskegon
Right.
or hardly anybody from Michigan. Well, there wasn't anybody from Michigan I knew. There was one fella from Muskegon in one of our firing batteries, and I did see him once after the war. I just got to know him because I'd see him once occasionally. Knew he's from Muskegon, but and I'd heard years ago that he had passed away. But that's most of them were from at that time during the war. I think they were just from all over. We had from California to New York.
Right. Now, were you with really the same group of guys pretty much from Fort Benning or whatever onward? I mean,
Yeah.
you were kind of.
Pretty much.
So you have a group of men who know each other fairly well,
Yeah,
work
I had
together.
some pictures of 4 or 5 of the guys that we were together from headquarters battery.
Right.
Half a dozen or more of us. So of course you knew most everybody in headquarters battery in a way, but there were 6 or 8 of us in the same head area that we were together a lot. But this one lad, Bob Sorter, there, and the other guy, Steve. What do I want to say, Mart? We found out he had a broken hip because we couldn't get in touch with him. Lyle Story. One I really been in touch with ever since I've been out, and we found out the other day we couldn't get him on the phone or anything. When we found out, Marcia got in touch with one of his daughters, and she said he'd fallen and broken his hip, and that's why we couldn't get in touch with him. But the 2 guys that I really was Bob Sorter and Lyle. They both live out in California, and they're only about 40 miles apart. But the other guys, a guy by the name of Bob Ott, he was in New York, and the guy from Lamaska, he was in Milwaukee. But he died quite young. But most of the guys weren't people that I would see
Right.
at all. But the only one I've been in contact with has been Lyle.
Right. All right then. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to me
I
today.
enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay. That's a wrap.